"Do cry, little one," he whispered. One look at the child changed his fate. Forever the sun was slowly sinking behind the small hills surrounding the town, casting long golden shadows over the dusty streets. The air was warm but carried a slight chill, hinting at the coming evening. Life in the town was simple, quiet, and often hard. People worked long hours just to make ends meet, children played in the dirt streets, and everyone knew everyone else's business. In the midst of this ordinary life, a man walked steadily along the main street, his worn boots kicking up little clouds of dust with every step. His name was Armin, a man in his late 30s, known to most as hardworking and reliable but quiet and reserved. He moved with purpose, carrying a small bag of tools slung over his shoulder. Today, he was on his way to repair a neighbor's broken fence, a task he often took on without complaint. Armin had lived in this town for most of his life. He had seen it grow, change, and struggle with each passing year. He knew every corner, every path, and almost every resident. His life had always been simple, and perhaps that was why he preferred it. Routine was predictable, and predictability was safe. He had few close friends, and even fewer people he truly trusted with his thoughts and feelings. His family had moved away years ago, leaving him to manage on his own. Some might have thought he was lonely, but Armin had learned to find contentment in simple things. The steady rhythm of work, the quiet nights under a star-filled sky, and the small moments of kindness he could offer others. As he turned a corner near the edge of town, a sound caught his attention, a soft, heart-wrenching cry. At first he thought it might be a dog or perhaps a baby bird fallen from its nest, but the sound was too human, too fragile to be ignored. He paused, listening carefully. The cries continued, small and desperate, almost as if they were pleading for someone to notice. Armin's heart tightened. Something inside him stirred, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, concern, compassion, and a sudden, urgent curiosity. He followed the sound down a narrow alley between two old brick buildings. The alley was quiet, the usual bustle of the town fading away, replaced by an uneasy silence that made the crying even more piercing. At the end of the alley, he spotted a small figure huddled against the wall. The child was no older than 4 or 5, with wide, tear-filled eyes and messy hair falling across a dirt-smudged face. The little body shook with sobs, tiny fists pressed against the knees, and the small shoes were scuffed and worn. The sight made Armin's chest tighten. He had seen hardship before, but seeing it in the eyes of such a tiny, helpless being hit him differently. Without thinking, he crouched down to the child's level, keeping his voice soft and calm. "Don't cry, little one," he whispered, his hand held out slowly, careful not to frighten the child further. The child looked up, startled, eyes wide and glistening with tears, unsure whether to trust this stranger. Armin kept his voice gentle, steady, a small anchor in the storm of the child's fear. "It's okay. You're safe now. I'm not going to hurt you." For a few tense moments, the child froze, trembling. Then, slowly, the tiny hands reached out, brushing against Armin's palm. The connection was immediate, silent, and profound. Something shifted in Armin's heart at that instant. A mix of protectiveness, empathy, and a strange, unexplainable sense of destiny. He had never been a man given to sudden emotions or impulsive decisions, but in that moment, all his careful walls crumbled. He knew, without a shadow of doubt, that he could not leave this child alone. The alley was quiet except for the soft sniffles and the faint sound of the wind rustling through the narrow space between the buildings. Armin looked around, hoping to see a parent, a neighbor, anyone who might claim the child, but the alley was empty. No one was coming. He knelt closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from the child's face. "I'll help you," he said softly. "We'll figure this out together." The child's sobs began to ease, replaced by tentative curiosity. Slowly, the small hand found his, and together they walked back toward the street. As they emerged from the alley, the world seemed to shift around Armin. The familiar town felt different somehow, quieter, more fragile, like it was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. People passed by without noticing the small pair, busy with their own lives. Armin knew he had to act carefully. He couldn't just take the child home without considering the consequences. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't ignore the urgent need to protect this tiny, frightened being. He led the child to a nearby bench, setting the little one down gently. "What's your name?" he asked, hoping for a response. The child shook the head slowly, tears still brimming. Armin nodded, understanding that names sometimes come later, that trust must be built first. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small bottle of water and a few biscuits he had packed for himself. Offering them to the child, he waited patiently, allowing the little one to take a small bite, eyes still wary but slightly less fearful. The evening grew darker, the golden light fading into a soft twilight. Armin knew he couldn't leave the child here, not with the night coming and the streets emptying. He made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. He would take the child home, at least temporarily, while he searched for any relatives or anyone who might be looking for the little one. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but his heart left him no choice. On the walk home, Armin noticed small things about the child that made him smile despite the worry. The little feet kicked gently against the ground, tiny fingers held loosely around his hand, and the child's breathing gradually became steadier. Every now and then the child looked up at him, eyes full of questions and wonder, and Armin felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. He had known hardship, disappointment, and loneliness, but this fragile, trusting presence was something new, something powerful. When they reached his modest home at the edge of town, Armin opened the door slowly, unsure how to proceed. He didn't want to frighten the child further, so he motioned for the little one to follow him inside. The home was simple, with a few pieces of furniture, worn floors, and the faint scent of wood and earth. It was not a place of luxury, but it was safe, warm, and welcoming. The child looked around curiously, eyes wide, and for the first time since he had found the little one, Armin felt a small spark of hope. He set the child down near a small rug and knelt again, making sure to meet the eyes. "You'll be safe here," he said softly. "No one will hurt you." The child's gaze lingered on his face, searching for any hint of unkindness, any reason to doubt. Seeing none, the child slowly relaxed, leaning back slightly, as if beginning to trust this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere to offer comfort. That night, Armin stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the quiet breathing of the child in the next room. He thought about how one small moment, hearing a cry in an alley, had completely shifted the course of his life. He wondered about the child's story. How had he ended up alone, scared, and wandering the streets? Where were the parents, and why had no one come looking? These questions weighed heavily on his mind, but they also strengthened his resolve. No matter what, he would protect this child. As he finally settled down for the night, a small smile formed on his lips. He had no idea what the future held, no idea how difficult the road ahead might be, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The child had changed something inside him. Life had been predictable, safe, and quiet for too long. But now, everything felt alive with possibility, with responsibility, and with a deep, unshakable bond that had formed in the span of a few brief, fragile moments. And somewhere deep inside, Armin whispered again, though the child was already asleep, "Don't cry, little one," knowing that both of their lives had been changed forever by this one encounter, and that tomorrow, their journey together would truly begin. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently into Armin's small home, warming the worn wooden floors and casting soft shadows across the walls. The child, still sleepy, rubbed tiny hands over tear-streaked cheeks and blinked slowly at the unfamiliar surroundings. Armin had prepared a simple breakfast, warm milk and a slice of bread, but the child only stared at it, hesitant, unsure of whether to trust this new world or the man who had appeared so suddenly in his life. Armin watched quietly, giving the child time. He remembered how scared the little one had been the day before, alone and crying in that quiet alley. The memory of the child's trembling hands and tear-filled eyes stayed with him, like a small flame burning steadily in his chest. He knew he had to be patient. Trust couldn't be rushed. With a gentle smile, he said, "It's okay, you can eat when you're ready." Slowly, the child took the bread and sipped the milk, eyes still wary but curious. Each small action, each bite, each sip felt like a victory. Armin felt a deep sense of satisfaction and relief. For the first time in a long while, he realized that his life was no longer only about his own routine and responsibilities. There was someone else now, someone who depended on him, and that thought brought both weight and warmth to his heart. After breakfast, Armin began his search for anyone who might know the child or be looking for him. He visited the local police station, explaining what had happened and describing the little one in detail. The officers listened politely, but said no one had reported a missing child matching the description. Armin left a note with the town bulletin board, asking if anyone recognized the child, and he even spoke to neighbors, shopkeepers, and passers-by. But no one had seen the child before, and no one came forward. Days passed, and the child stayed with Armin. Slowly, a bond began to form between them. The little one started to trust him, following him from room to room, holding his hand without fear, and even laughing softly when Armin told simple stories or made funny faces. Each moment of trust, each smile, each quiet laugh, strengthened Armin's resolve to protect the child no matter what. As the routine of their new life settled in, Armin discovered small joys he hadn't felt in years. He taught the child to wash his hands properly, to brush teeth, to put toys away, and even to walk safely along the narrow street in front of the house. At night, he read simple stories aloud, the child's eyes growing wide with wonder and imagination. Armin would often find himself smiling at the little one's curiosity, feeling a deep connection he could not explain. He had spent so many years focused on work and routine, but now his heart had found something much more important, a purpose beyond himself. At the same time, Armin faced practical challenges he had never anticipated. Caring for a child was not easy. The little one needed constant attention, meals had to be prepared carefully, and every small need required patience. Armin had grown used to living alone, managing his own time and tasks. Now he had to think about someone else constantly. Yet he never complained. Every difficulty, every sleepless night, every small accident felt worth it because the child's safety and happiness were at stake. Armin also had to consider the future. While he cared for the child, he knew he could not keep him hidden forever. Authorities might intervene, and there was always the possibility that someone would claim the child or insist he be placed in an orphanage. The thought worried him deeply. Yet every time he looked at the little one's face, he felt a renewed determination. He could not abandon this responsibility. He had to find a way to protect the child, to provide a stable home, and perhaps even give him a family, even if it was just the two of them. As the week went on, the child began to open up more. Small details about his life emerged through playful conversation, simple gestures, and shy responses to questions. He liked drawing with crayons, chasing small animals in the yard, and listening to Armin's soft humming in the evening. Yet there were moments of sadness and fear that could not be ignored. Sometimes, the child would stare into the distance with a faraway look, as if remembering something he could not yet explain. Armin would sit quietly beside him, holding his small hand, whispering gently, "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe now." One afternoon, as Armin was fixing a broken fence at the edge of his yard, the child toddled after him, curious and cautious. The wind blew softly through the trees, carrying the faint scent of flowers from a nearby garden. The child pointed at the tools, asking questions in a quiet voice. Armin explained patiently, showing him how each tool worked, letting the child touch them carefully. The child's eyes sparkled with curiosity, and for a moment Armin forgot all worries about the outside world. He felt a rare, peaceful happiness, a sense that life in this small, quiet corner of the world could be beautiful, but the peace was fragile. There were moments when Armin would step back and reflect on the situation. Who were the child's parents? Why had he been alone? Was there someone out there desperately searching for him? These questions weighed heavily on Armin's mind, and sometimes sleep came with a sense of unease. He knew that caring for the child would not be simple, but he also knew that turning away was not an option. His sense of responsibility, combined with a deep emotional bond, had made the decision for him. At night, when the child was asleep, Armin often sat by the window looking out at the stars. The quiet town, with its dim streetlights and calm streets, seemed peaceful and ordinary, but Armin's mind was anything but ordinary. He thought about the changes this small child had brought into his life, how something as simple as a cry in an alley could shift the path of his life forever. He reflected on the fragile nature of life, the unexpected moments that carry great meaning, and the ways in which one life could deeply impact another. As the days turned into weeks, the child grew more comfortable, laughing freely, sharing small stories, and showing trust in ways that touched Armin deeply. He had begun to learn the rhythms of the child's moods, understanding the small signals of fear, joy, or curiosity. And in return, the child had learned to rely on Armin, seeking his comfort when scared, his guidance when curious, and his protection when unsure. The bond between them strengthened in ways that were quiet but undeniable. Armin also began to notice subtle changes in himself. The routine of caring for the child, once exhausting, had become rewarding. He smiled more, felt more patient, and began to see beauty in the smallest details. A bird singing in the morning, the way sunlight danced across the walls, the sound of laughter echoing softly in the quiet house. For years, he had lived in a kind of solitude, but now he understood that love and responsibility could transform even the most ordinary life into something extraordinary. One day, as they sat together under the shade of a large tree in the yard, the child leaned against Armin and whispered, "I like being here." The simple words struck Armin in a way he could not describe. They were not just words, they were a small, powerful acknowledgement of trust and love. Armin hugged the child gently, holding him close, and whispered back, "And I like having you here, you're safe with me, always." The town remained quiet around them, unaware of the deep bond forming in this small home at the edge of the street. Life continued as usual for most people, but for Armin and the child, every day was a new adventure, a new lesson, and a new chance to grow together. Each challenge they faced, each fear they overcame, and each moment of joy strengthened the connection between them. The child, once alone and crying in an alley, had found a protector and a friend. And Armin's weeks turned into months. Armin and the child settled into a quiet rhythm, yet life remained far from easy. Each day brought new challenges, small and large, that tested his patience, resourcefulness, and resolve. Caring for a child was not just about feeding, clothing, or protecting him. It was about guiding, comforting, and understanding a fragile little soul whose past he could only imagine. The child, still unnamed because no family had come forward, began to trust Armin more deeply, seeking his hand when crossing the street, looking up to him with wide, curious eyes, and clinging to him when shadows or noises frightened him. Armin found that even the simplest tasks required careful planning. Mornings were filled with preparing breakfast, cleaning up, and making sure the child was dressed appropriately for the day. Afternoons often meant errands, trips to the market, or visits to neighbors for small favors or supplies. Evenings were quieter, spent reading, telling stories, or playing simple games to encourage laughter and imagination. Through it all, Armin learned a kind of patience he had never known before, a willingness to set aside his own needs for the sake of someone else's comfort and happiness. Yet, despite the growing warmth between them, challenges were unavoidable. The little one's fears sometimes resurfaced in sudden bursts of tears or anxiety, triggered by a loud noise, a shadow, or a stranger's glance. Armin handled these moments with care, speaking softly, holding the child close, and offering reassurance without scolding or frustration. He realized that trust, once broken or absent, could not be rebuilt overnight. Every gentle touch, every kind word, was a brick in the foundation of the child's sense of safety. One day, as Armin was sweeping the yard, the child wandered toward the edge of the property, distracted by a small bird hopping along the fence. Before Armin could react, the little one slipped on the loose soil and fell, scraping his knee. The child's cry pierced Armin's heart. He rushed to the side, scooping the child up and examining the wound. Tears streamed down the child's face, but Armin remained calm, holding him gently and whispering, "It's okay. It's just a little scrape. You're safe." He cleaned the wound carefully, applied a small bandage, and hugged the child tightly until the sobs subsided. That moment, though small, reinforced their connection. Armin realized that protection was not just about keeping the child physically safe, but about being a constant presence in moments of fear and pain. The child began to show signs of personality and preferences. He loved simple games, often laughing at Armin's attempts to teach him how to toss a ball or stack blocks. He had a favorite corner of the yard where he liked to play, and he began to enjoy small snacks like apples or bread with honey. Armin observed every small change with careful attention, noting what brought joy and what caused discomfort. Slowly, the child's life, once lonely and uncertain, began to take shape under Armin's care. Despite the growing bond, Armin faced moments of doubt and worry. What if the child's family appeared unexpectedly? What if authorities intervened? What if he failed to provide the safety and love the child needed? These thoughts haunted him in the quiet hours of the night, but each time he looked at the child's peaceful, sleeping face, he pushed the fear aside. He had chosen this path, and he would walk it fully, regardless of the uncertainties ahead. Armin's own life began to change in unexpected ways. He found himself smiling more often, speaking more softly, and appreciating the small wonders of the world around him. The laughter of the child brought light into his home, and even the simplest moments, watching the sunset together, sharing a warm meal, or listening to the child's questions, felt profound. Life, once predictable and quiet, was now vibrant and meaningful. The child had opened Armin's heart in ways he had never imagined. There were also lessons in humility and patience. The child was stubborn at times, refusing to eat certain foods or follow instructions. Armin learned to negotiate, to offer choices, and to respect the child's feelings without giving in to frustration. Each small compromise strengthened their relationship. The child began to respond to Armin's guidance with growing confidence, learning how to express needs and emotions in words rather than tears. One afternoon, Armin decided to take the child to the town square. It was a small excursion, just a short walk, but it was an important step. The streets were busy with people, carts, and animals, and the child clung tightly to Armin's hand, eyes wide with curiosity and caution. They walked slowly, Armin pointing out flowers, birds, and shops along the way. He encouraged the child to greet neighbors and passers-by, teaching small lessons in politeness and courage. The child's initial shyness gradually faded, replaced by a growing confidence born of trust and love. During this time, Armin also reflected on his own past, realizing how much he had relied on routine and solitude to protect himself from disappointment. The arrival of the child had forced him to face vulnerability, to open his heart, and to embrace responsibility. It was a transformation that was quiet, almost imperceptible, but deep and lasting. He found joy in small victories, a shared laugh, a successful task completed together, or the child's hand finding his in moments of fear. Evenings became their time for storytelling. Armin would invent tales of faraway lands, brave heroes, and clever children who solved problems with kindness and courage. The child would listen with wide eyes, sometimes interrupting with questions or suggestions, and often falling asleep halfway through. These stories became a bridge between them, a way for the child to understand the world, and for Armin to share lessons of patience, courage, and love. There were moments of tension as well. The child would sometimes speak of memories he could not fully explain, brief glimpses of a home or family he remembered, fragments of events that made Armin wonder about the child's past. These glimpses were bittersweet, reminding him of the uncertainties that still lingered. He never pressured the child, instead listening quietly, offering comfort, and assuring him that he was not alone. Armin also began to connect with the community in new ways. Neighbors who had once seen him as solitary and quiet began to notice the changes. The way he cared for the child, the small acts of kindness, and the patient attention he gave to the little one. Some offered help, bringing small gifts or lending supplies, while others simply watched, impressed by the bond forming before their eyes. The child, once fearful of strangers, began to recognize familiar faces and respond with shy waves or small smiles. Through all of this, Armin realized that love could transform more than one life at a time. His own life, once steady and predictable, had become richer, fuller, and more meaningful. The child, once lost and scared, was slowly learning to trust, to laugh, and to feel secure. Each challenge faced together, each tear wiped away, each smile shared, built a foundation that neither of them could have imagined when they first met in that quiet alley. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over their small home, Armin sat with the child on his lap. The little one rested his head against Armin's chest, exhausted from a day filled with play, learning, and exploration. Armin held him gently, rocking him slightly, and whispered softly, "You're safe now, always." The child murmured something in response, a sleepy sound that made Armin smile despite the fatigue. In the stillness of that moment, Armin understood the depth of their connection. This child had arrived in his life unexpectedly, yet he had changed everything, his perspective, his priorities, and his heart. The challenges were real, the responsibilities heavy, but the rewards, trust, love, and the knowledge that he was making a difference were immeasurable. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Armin sat quietly, reflecting on the journey so far. He had faced uncertainty, worry, and the unknown, but he had also discovered courage, patience, and a capacity for love he had never imagined. The child's presence had illuminated his life in ways he could not have anticipated. And though the future remained uncertain, he knew one thing for certain. Together, they could face whatever came, finding strength in their bond and hope in their shared journey. And as the child drifted off to sleep, breathing softly and peacefully, Armin whispered once more, almost to himself, "We'll always be together, no matter what." The words were more than a promise. They were a recognition that life had changed irrevocably, that love had woven itself into the fabric of their existence, and that neither of them would ever be the same again. Time passed, and the small home at the edge of town had grown warmer, fuller, and brighter because of the little one. The child, now more confident, playful, and curious, had begun to thrive under Armin's care. Every morning he woke with a smile, rushing to find Armin, ready to greet the day with energy and laughter. Armin, in turn, found himself looking forward to each new day in ways he had never imagined. Life had once been predictable and quiet, but now it was filled with purpose, love, and an unspoken understanding between two souls who had found each other unexpectedly. Despite the peaceful rhythm of their days, life still presented challenges. School was approaching for the child, and Armin had to ensure he was prepared. This meant organizing supplies, teaching basic skills, and helping the little one practice reading and writing. The child struggled at first, unsure of the new routines and sometimes frustrated with lessons that seemed too difficult. But Armin was patient, guiding him gently, celebrating every small success, and offering comfort when mistakes were made. Slowly, the child began to learn and grow, discovering the joy of achievement and the confidence that comes with mastering new skills. As they spent more time together, Armin noticed how the child's personality was blossoming. He was curious about the world, asking endless questions about the people, animals, and places around him. He loved exploring the garden, collecting flowers, chasing butterflies, and listening to Armin's explanations about how things worked. Each discovery, each moment of wonder, strengthened the bond between them. Armin felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. He realized that caring for the child was not only about protection, but also about nurturing imagination, curiosity, and confidence. The townspeople had also begun to notice the change in Armin. The quiet, reserved man who had always kept to himself was now more open, patient, and kind. Neighbors smiled when they saw him with the child, offering small words of encouragement or helping hands. Some had even brought gifts for the little one, books, toys, or clothes, showing that the community, too, had begun to embrace them. Armin appreciated the gestures but never relied on them entirely. He knew that his first priority was the child's safety, happiness, and emotional well-being. One evening, as they sat together under the stars, the child leaned against Armin's chest, looking up at the sky with wonder. "Do the stars ever get tired?" he asked softly. Armin smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the child's forehead. "No, little one, the stars shine every night just like you shine every day, and like you, they never give up." The child's eyes widened, absorbing the words with a seriousness that surprised Armin. He realized that the little one was learning lessons far beyond reading and writing, lessons about resilience, hope, and the quiet strength found in love and care. As time went on, Armin and the child faced small challenges together, each one teaching them more about patience, trust, and understanding. There were days when the child became sick, and Armin stayed by his side, offering comfort, medicine, and gentle reassurance. There were days when the child's curiosity led him into minor accidents, and Armin had to intervene, teaching lessons about safety and care. Through it all, their bond deepened, becoming unbreakable. The child had learned to trust Armin completely, and Armin had learned the true meaning of responsibility, love, and sacrifice. Armin often thought about the day he had found the child, alone and crying in the alley. That one moment, one brief encounter, had changed his life forever. He had never imagined that a tiny, tearful child could awaken so much love, patience, and purpose within him. And yet, looking at the child now, laughing, learning, and growing, he knew that everything in his life had led to this moment. The child had not only found safety and care, but had also transformed Armin into a better, fuller version of himself. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the house. Armin's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the handwriting of a local official. The letter stated that no one had come forward to claim the child, and that, legally, he could continue to care for him. Relief washed over Armin, and he felt a sense of validation for all the hard work, sleepless nights, and quiet sacrifices he had made. He knew that the bond they shared could now grow without fear of being torn apart. Despite the legal assurance, Armin remained humble. He understood that raising the child would continue to be a journey, filled with joys and challenges alike. He focused on the everyday moments, the laughter, the lessons, the comforting of fears, and the quiet evenings under the stars. Every action, every word, every gentle gesture built a foundation of trust, love, and security that would last a lifetime. The child, now beginning to understand the world more fully, began to respond to Armin in new ways. He showed affection openly, hugging Armin when frightened, holding his hand tightly when walking along the street, and seeking reassurance in moments of uncertainty. The child's laughter became a constant presence in the home, a sound that filled the rooms with warmth and joy. Armin, in turn, found himself smiling more often, speaking more gently, and discovering a capacity for love he had never realized. One quiet evening, as they sat by the window watching the sunset, the child rested his head against Armin's shoulder. "Do you think I'll ever meet my family?" he asked softly, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. Armin held him close, feeling the small, steady heartbeat against his chest. "No matter what happens," he said gently, "you will always have a family here. You have me and I will always be with you. You are safe, loved, and never alone." The child's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not just tears of fear. They were tears of relief, comfort, and trust. The years continued to pass, and the child grew stronger, healthier, and more confident. Armin guided him through each step of life, teaching him how to read, helping him make friends in the town, and nurturing his curiosity and imagination. The child began to understand the value of kindness, patience, and love, lessons he carried with him in every interaction. Armin's influence shaped him, not just in learning or safety, but in character, courage, and heart. As the child matured, the bond between him and Armin became something deeper than words could describe. It was a connection built on trust, care, and countless shared experiences. The child had once been lost, alone, and frightened, but under Armin's guidance he had flourished. He had discovered joy, security, and love. And Armin, once a quiet man living a simple life, had discovered purpose, resilience, and the profound impact one life can have on another. One afternoon, the child approached Armin with a small drawing. It showed the two of them holding hands under a bright sun, with stars above and a home nearby. "This is us," the child said proudly. Armin's eyes welled with tears as he hugged him tightly. "Yes, this is us," he said softly. Forever. In that moment, the story of their lives, filled with uncertainty, fear, and hope, reached a point of quiet triumph. They had built something lasting, a bond that would not break, a family that was chosen, and a life filled with love and meaning. The town continued to watch them with admiration. Neighbors saw the changes in Armin, the confidence in the child, and the love they shared. The quiet man who had once lived a life of solitude had become a symbol of patience, compassion, and dedication. The child, once alone and frightened, had grown into a joyful, curious, and confident young soul. Together, they represented the power of kindness, trust, and human connection. Years later, as the child looked back on his early memories, he remembered the day he had cried in the alley and the man who had knelt beside him, whispering, "Don't cry, little one." That one moment had changed everything. The child realized that life could be unpredictable, challenging, and sometimes lonely, but also filled with people willing to love, protect, and guide. And in Armin, he had found not just a guardian, but a true family, a safe home, and a heart that would always belong to him. Armin, too, often reflected on that first encounter. He remembered the small, tearful eyes that had stared at him from the alley, the quiet trust that had formed in an instant, and the way his life had shifted forever in a single moment. He had once lived a life of quiet routine, but now his days were filled with laughter, love, and purpose. He had discovered that one act of kindness could change more than a moment. It could change a lifetime. As the sun set one evening, Armin and the child sat together on the porch, holding hands and watching the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, reflecting the warmth and hope that filled their hearts. Armin smiled and whispered softly almost the same words he had spoken years ago. "Don't cry, little one." This time, the child smiled back, safe, happy, and confident. The fear of that first day had faded. replaced by love, trust, and the knowledge that their lives were forever intertwined. And in that quiet moment, it was clear that the journey they had shared, the hardships, the laughter, the tears, and the small victories, had created something unbreakable. A life that had once been lonely and uncertain had become full of hope, love, and meaning. A child who had once cried alone in an alley had found safety, family, and a heart that would always protect him. And a man who had lived quietly and cautiously had discovered the profound, transformative power of love. Together, they had created a story that would last forever, a story of trust, courage, and the unshakable bond between two lives that fate had brought together in a single, unforgettable moment. NCE, living a life of routine and quiet solitude, had found purpose, love, and a reason to hope. As the sun set on another day, casting warm orange and pink hues across the sky, Armin sat with the child on his lap, watching the stars appear one by one. The world felt calm, yet full of possibility. He knew there were still challenges ahead, questions to answer, uncertainties to face. But he also knew that whatever came, he would not be alone. He had found someone worth fighting for, someone who had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. And as the child's small head rested against his chest, breathing steady and peaceful, Armin whispered softly, almost to himself, "We'll figure it out together, always." In that quiet, ordinary evening, two lives had begun to intertwine in a way that would shape their futures forever. The journey was only beginning, but both Armin and the child had already learned something essential. Love, trust, and care could change everything.